Hopefully you got sound now. All good? Good, good, good. So, still no audio. Testing, testing. Yes, good, good, good. So, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to those joining us from across the globe. We have a packed room today, people all across the globe, and I thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. So, welcome from MSAB. We're looking at Turn the Dials to 10, and this is part 1 of 3 of a webinar series. We're going to be looking at the tool XAMN Pro. Now, today we are debuting a brand new webinar platform, hence why we lost sound at the start. So please bear with us if something doesn't work as expected. We wanted to switch to a platform that was browser-based because we got a lot of feedback from our previous platform that working mainly in government organizations, they don't like you installing stuff on their systems. Now, I am running this webinar solo, so if you ask any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, please bear with me and I'll get to them as and when I can. I've also set up some handouts for you in relation to XAMN that you can view or download throughout the webinar. And I'm just about to turn on some polls which are going to ask for options for you to advise us of any topics that you'd like to see us cover in the future. So I often find when I visit forensic units, and I'm very fortunate I get to visit them across the globe. However, I'm finding more and more that examiners new to the industry are relying on pressing the find evidence button. Now, of course, I'm an ex-practitioner. I understand it is built from necessity to cope with the over-demanding pressures that are being placed on you guys to deal with the volume of casework that is sat on your desk. Now, however, we must, as an industry, understand what our tools are doing, and we also need to have the necessary skills to go and pass that data if we find that our forensic tools are not. We also need to develop our knowledge around creating a digital strategy to deal with the huge influx of data that we all as investigators are having land on our desk. And I'll just switch my camera off now so you guys get more real estate. So just bear me a second. There we go. So who are MSAB? Hopefully, most of you on the call are going to be aware of who we are. You may, in fact, refer to us as XRY. But XRY is just one of the tools that MSAB has developed. So MSAB is dedicated to mobile device forensics. We have been since 2003, and we have thousands of active customers globally. Our technology can be found in over 100 countries, and we have employees over 200 based worldwide, some of which all come with a law enforcement or military background, which helps us relate to the pain points that you guys are seeing. So for those of you who are not aware of who I am, it makes sense for me to share a few details about myself. So I'm Adam Furman, and for those of you who can hear it, yes, I'm a Brit, but don't hold that against me. Now, like I said, I was an ex-practitioner. I was a police officer in the UK for 15 years. I spent the majority of my career in the DFU, in a forensic lab. And prior to that, I started, as most police officers do, in uniform patrol. Following uniform patrol, I went on to plainclothes and undercover work, where I became a detective before joining the digital forensic unit. Now, my move to DFU was purely out of luck. It's not something I ever dreamed of doing or even knew was a career path. I suffered an injury on duty, and I'd like to say to you all today that it was heroic, but it was anything but. So when I was on the plainclothes drugs team, we'd just executed a search warrant address, the door had been put in, and as we were raiding the house, I slipped on the grass, causing my knee to dislocate. Now, that resulted in some painful surgery, and during my time, I was office bound and bored, so I thought, why not complete a degree in software development. Tech had always interested me, so that's what I started to do. Now, thankfully, this didn't go unnoticed, and my supervisor at the time asked if I wanted a temporary post to the forensic unit. So temporary that I never exited the forensic unit and never looked back, if I'm honest, and thoroughly enjoyed my time within that forensic unit. Now, I started in the acquisition stages. So the production line of digital forensics, we're talking about that sheer volume of work that you guys are seeing. Now, thankfully, I soon got the hang of that. I was running around 15 workstations, and I soon got bored whilst I was waiting for processes to finish. So I used my degree to good use and had a look if I could automate my own job. Thankfully, once I realized that the majority of computer forensic acquisition tools had a command line switch, I wrote a script that would automate computer hard drive acquisition, and then if it was successful, I would then run subsequent processes on it, dependent on the case type. Now, I've fine-tuned this process, and I managed to take our unit's computer backlog down to 0, if only that could be done for phones, hey. But my department manager then decided that I would be better off working beyond the find evidence button, and I became an analyst. And it was here that I answered the queries that came in from the prosecution and defense, and I spent my time attending court and giving evidence on the evidence that was missed by forensic tools, explaining that to the lay person. Now, during my time in the forensic unit, I was fortunate to work on several high-profile cases involving child sexual abuse material, fatal traffic collisions, Bitcoin, money laundering, human trafficking, just to name a few. So what is my role within MSAB? So I'm here really to ensure that you guys out there with our license get the most value from it. And how do I do that? I release things such as a monthly podcast called Forensic Fix. I also produce weekly tip videos on YouTube, which is MSAB Monday. All of these are to try and keep you up to date with all of the advancements that are made in our software. We're all more than aware that the mobile devices in our pocket change daily, and MSAB has to respond to that. We all know that these changes are happening, and my job really is to make sure that you know what's available in the tool to get the most out of those extractions. So, the agenda. Like I said at the start, this is part 1 of a 3-part webinar series. Part 1, we're going to be looking at the planning and preparation. You can almost liken it to decorating. This is about making good, so when you get to the finishing part, the painting, the wallpapering, you've done the preparation to make sure it's going to be a success. We're going to be covering digital strategies, why they are important, and I will show you some mock examples that you could base future work on. And if you want a copy of those mock examples, please reach out to me and I will happily share them. We're going to look at how to set up an extraction and analytical tool to suit the case type that we're actually working on. Part 2 will then see us focus on the deeper investigation. Part 1 will initially start the investigation, but part 2 is where we're going to go into our deep dive. And finally, part 3 will finish things off with concluding our investigation, reporting and tagging, and ensuring that we are reporting in layman's terms on the evidence that we've discovered during our investigation. Details for part 2 of this webinar series will come up at the very end of today's presentation. Now, I like to refer to this slide as prepare, prepare, prepare. But how do we achieve a good preparation? Like most things in life, preparation is key. The more you prepare, the better your delivery and service will be. Now, validation. Validation is my favorite subject to talk about in DFIR. And over the webinar series, we're going to cover this. And it's important for so many reasons. And we're going to be taking a look at why validation is just as important to any investigation as along with preparation. And we're also going to cover on what do you do if your tool does not pass the data. You've turned all of the options on in your extraction tool, you've set the dials to 10, but you believe that you are still missing data. And this could be from intelligence you've received or even just a visual check of that handset. What next? We're going to show you the need to understand how to deep dive and how to report on those findings. And then we're going to move on to our review strategy. It's extremely important to have a strategy in place so you can deal with the huge quantities of digital data that we discussed at the start. We need to know details of the incident. We need to know people, persons. These are the sort of things that we need to establish. And in DFIR, there are several factors that you must consider before even opening an exhibit bag. So let's have a look at a mock example. So you can see here, I've put together a digital investigation plan. And like I said, there are several factors that you must consider. Even before opening the exhibit bag, we probably should be making considerations before the device even comes into our custody in DFU. We need to consider things such as encryption, if a Faraday bag's needed, device logs. But when you have the device in your custody, the first step to consider is your extraction tool passing and decoding what you need it to? You need to consider the points to prove for your case. What are you trying to look to establish? Does your case need things such as OCR or other intensive processes to be run? Is it overkill and adding unnecessary processing time to your case? Consider what you need and adjust your tools accordingly. This is where you should be considering a digital strategy like the one you're seeing on screen. So at the top of the form that I've got on screen, this would be filled out by the submitting investigator. So they're not the forensic analyst, but the submitting investigator needs to tell us what is the date and time of the offence, the location of the offence, if that is relevant, the defendant and subject full names and any nicknames they may go by. Important, what is the offence that we're investigating? We need to clearly know their details, and we also need to know what exhibits have been submitted. And if there's any linked co-defendants, it's going to help us set the parameters of our search. And finally, tell us what you want us to establish. And as can be seen on the screen, using the details above, it's going to allow us to set that scope. So continuing with our look at preparation, tool setup really needs to be looked into. You can see on the screen, I've got the process options for XRY, and I've highlighted with underline in red some of the options available to you. But each forensic case that we investigate is going to be different. It is not a one size fits all. Could you spend the time setting up case-specific extraction profiles? For example, having a profile for a child sexual abuse material case, where you'd be focusing on Project Vic or CADE. You'd want to turn on things such as generate video preview and thumbnails to save you watching countless hours of videos. You may want to run OCR. Now, anyone who's worked in this industry is going to know that that is clearly going to add time to your processing of your case. But case specific, it may be worth it. But if you suddenly found that your next case was a fraud, some of those options may not need to be turned on. So choosing how you set up for a case based on the specifics of that offence, in my opinion, is a worthwhile investment of your time. And did I also mention set an investigation plan? And hopefully you're getting the message now. You've got to prepare to win and prepare not to fail. and make the most of your time in an efficient way. Now, we spoke about extraction. Makes sense. We got to set our tool up, but you also need to pay attention to setting up your analytical tool. What functionality can be turned on or off that would assist your case? What automated filters or word searches could you run for every case going forward? It could save time, it could improve your efficiency, and is worthwhile your investment. Remember your points to prove. Remember that each case may have specific filters to be run, and most importantly, stick to your digital investigation plan and strategy, and don't go down the rabbit hole. Now, I shared a mock investigation plan earlier. Thankfully, one of my good friends has shared ones that they use within law enforcement. So I will be sharing, when we go into our demo, some of the more detailed versions that they would be using, just so you can get an idea of the sort of preparation that is being put in before any analytical work is taking place. Now, validation. Anyone who's watched my MSAB Mondays will know that validation is my #1 topic to discuss within DFIR. For a number of reasons. You need to have confidence when you're given evidence. You need to believe and trust in what your tool is telling you. You need to know its capabilities, but more importantly, you need to understand its limitations. Now, in my opinion, every tool should allow you to validate what it is showing you. What database, XML file, protobuf, where did that artifact come from? If it's a database, for example, which table, which row, and which column? Show me, make it simple for me as an examiner to go in and validate, for example, that you decoded the timestamp correctly. My case may revolve around that one timestamp. I need to have 100% confidence that it's been done correctly. Now, anybody joining us from the UK, when they see the bottom bullet point, is probably shaking their head, but ISO is playing a huge part in the world of DFIR. ISO demands that tools, and not by vendors, are validated by you guys with each major version. Now, this is a pain and a benefit, in my opinion. Painful because it demands time and money, both of which we know is lacking from the DFIR world. However, it does have its benefits. It makes people work to a standard. Everybody's work is completed in the same methodology. They're using the same forms, they're having the same naming convention, and it allows for a better way of working. But my biggest part of ISO is it's showing people and examiners that validation is a crucial part of your investigation. I'm just going to start another poll. So I've just started another poll for you guys, just to talk about training and webinars and the best way that you're finding you can stay current with your products. But let's continue with. So where is my data? We've spoke about setting our extraction tool up. We've spoke about setting our analytical tool up. We turned all the dials to 10, but your tool did not decode that app that only came out a week ago. How can you expect your tool to do it when they haven't even released a version since the app was released? It will happen, and it can happen. So no tool vendor can cover every single application in the Play and the Apple App Store. It would be impossible. Not only do we as a tool vendor have to cover a significant number of apps, we also have to update those apps each and every time they get an update. And we know that apps change as much as our devices and the operating systems, possibly even more. So tool vendors spend a significant amount of time and resources ensuring that those most popular apps still works. And we have to factor in things such as have artifact locations stayed the same? Will our previous decoding work, or will the new version make our decoding obsolete? Do we need time to reverse engineer that app again? This is where you need to know your tool's powers. You need to understand how to go deep diving. What I would always recommend is to validate your findings with other tools when you do locate data that is unparsed, and create test data. Creating test data allows you to have 100% confidence in what the tool should be extracting. You know what you carried out on your test device, so you know what to search for, and you know if it's correct or not. And if you do spend the time reverse engineering a new app, share your findings. We as a community prosper from shared research. And you could share this in the form of a Python script, or you could add it into the Leap range. And don't allow your peers to spend time reverse engineering an app that you have. This is going to help people within the community, and we're all going to benefit as one team. So, shall we start to have a look at some of the test forms that I spoke about, and we'll jump into XAMN Pro. I think I've rambled on enough. So let's just get this. So, test forms. I'm going to start here at number 1. So this is the digital investigation plan that I showed off at the beginning. Now, this one is going to be for the case that we're working on. So we have a defendant that's been arrested for human trafficking. Surprise, surprise, they answered no comment to all questions when interviewed. Our submitting officer has told us that a surveillance operation has been undertaken, and they've identified the defendant as being involved in a global human trafficking operation. So here we have the date and time of arrest. So June the 10th, 2024. So he was arrested this week, and they ran the operation for 2 months. The location doesn't really help us. It's global, but at least we have an awareness of what our scope can be. We have a suspect name, a subject. We have their full name, and we have their nickname in brackets. We have the offence along with the investigating officer. We also have details of what the handset is, the exhibit reference, and a serial number. This is going to help with attribution. And we have co-defendants. Co-defendants are an extremely good way to help us narrow the scope of our investigation. And obviously the points to prove are involved with human trafficking. And just a reminder that we have the information submitted by the investigating officer. And using the details above are going to allow us to set scope for the work that we're going to carry out. We know it's not feasible to review every artifact, and it would be unrealistic for us to do it. But having these parameters allows us to set date, time, people, keywords, and allows us to focus on the points to prove. So that allows us to get a date. We know that we're going to set a parameter of 2 weeks either side. And by doing this, it also allows us to justify the actions we're taking. Because of privacy and human rights, people are in different parts of the globe, people are now being questioned as to why they're reviewing certain parts of data. It's an invasion of people's privacy. Now, if we can give a justification for why we're doing it, then it's recorded here in this investigation plan. So we've got keywords here that we can run. We know the points to prove are for the human trafficking offence, and here are the process and options I'm going to turn on. I'm going to turn on OCR, because with human trafficking, we know potentially they could contain documentation, bank cards, and ID cards. So OCR is going to help me run keyword searches and find any of that text that's found within those images. I'm also going to run the ability to search text within files. And why would I want to do this? Now, I'd want to do this because if I do happen to have intelligence about data being in an unparsed application, it allows me to keywordplists or XML or database files within that app. So if I've got hits in apps that I wasn't aware of, by choosing that option, I can then search within those files. And then the tools used, we're going to use XRY Pro and XAMN Pro. Now, the following documents have been shared by my police colleague in the UK, and they're just to give you an indication of the sort of level of preparation that can go into these cases. And you can see we start off with full details of who the senior investigating officer is, analyst, etc. We also look at potentially, are we dealing with a victim or a suspect? And again, scene addresses. We've got to think about vehicles. See, this potentially could knock on to other areas of digital evidence. And thank you for whoever covered optical character recognition. Sorry for not explaining that. So the senior investigating officer is going to set their hypothesis. And then just a reminder that we've got to follow a code of ethics. We've got to identify victims, suspects, but we need to gather information and intelligence. But we have to be proportionate to the circumstances. This is a good reminder of sticking to the scope of our investigation. And as we scroll through, you can see summary of case, very similar, but a lot more detailed in the original form I showed you. So moving on to the next document. So this is a phone review document, and this is what you'd fill in as you were carrying out your inquiries. So up here, we've got our case operation details, our OIC details, our investigation overview, and our review strategy, what software we use. So all of these forms are very similar, but they're giving you a good feel of the sort of information that we should be capturing. Can we attribute the device to the defendant? What is our degree of certainty? Is it high, medium, low? Have we found their personal details on the device? Have we got an image that we found on the device of the suspect? We can also look at further details of attribution, that we found a banking app, or we found a P-list with their name or registered telephone number. And let's have a look at what we should all be doing within digital forensics, and that is carrying out an audit log. So every action that we take has to be justified and recordable and repeatable. So here we have an example of an investigation log that covers the details of the incident, any victim or suspect names, and a date and time and a log for everything that we did. We've got to remember that every action that we carry out needs to be repeatable. And XAMN Pro does cover some of this. There is an audit log built within XAMN, which helps us, but this is just a log that you can run alongside it. But XAMN Pro is going to help to save duplication. And just before we get started, I'm just going to kick off the last poll, which is asking, are you an existing XAMN Pro user? So let us start having a look at some of our files. So we have in here, we've got several files. So you can see here, we've got an XAMN Pro free file, and you can see from the size, that's likely to be our extraction file. I spoke about the audit log. So the next file is an audit file, and that's going to track any actions that are taken within our case. The next file, .xry case, is a case file. And what this does is it allows us to track and work with several exhibits at once. You can see that the three files below this, they are all cloud token files, and they've all got the .xry file extension. So when I click this case file, it's going to know that all of these files belong to this case, which helps to streamline the work. So what happens when we click the case file? Because if I was just to click this, it would just open that single file. If I open the case file, I then get the option. Now you may be asking yourself, the extraction's finished. Why would I want to open it in XRY? Now, this is for a number of factors. So when you extract a device in XRY, it is never decoded again unless you choose to redecode it. So if I completed this extraction in XRY 10.9 or 10.9.1, and I then shared that extraction with a defense expert who then wanted to redecode in XRY 10.10, our data is clearly going to be different. We're going to be looking at two different data sets because they may have added support for a new application, for example. So this way allows the file to remain as it was at the point of extraction, but it also allows you, as you're working your case, that if a new version did come out and suddenly supported that app that you wanted support for, you could simply choose to open an XRY and redecode in the latest version. But for today, we're going to use XAMN Pro. So XAMN Pro is going to open, and it's going to open all of those XRY files contained within that case. And as we expand our screen, you can see it has indeed. We have our extraction file for the device, and we have our free cloud tokens. So we have arrived in XAMN Pro on the main case page. And on the case page, which we're currently viewing, which is the overview page. Now, the overview page is going to tell you the case information, the data sources, which we've already covered, and the investigate. So the investigate section can be seen as hyperlinks. So these are hyperlinks that are going to invoke filters. If I wanted to, for example, just look at pictures, if I click pictures, funnily enough, a new tab's going to open here with just pictures. And as we scroll down, we have more of these investigate hyperlinks. We can be very specific on app, recognize content, any hash watch lists, because in XRY, we can pre-run a hash list. We also have a camera filter. So if there's any metadata from the images that are contained within this case, we can invoke that. We also have an identified language filter. So going back to the top, I explained how we are on the overview page. If I switch to the data sources, this allows me to have a look at the evidence files that are in play for this case. So we knew how the top three were the cloud tokens, but the bottom one is my extraction. And when I can click that, I can see that this was a Samsung Exynos physical. And as we scroll down, we could set a picture for that device. We can see the details of the SIM. We can see that this device was clearly running an eSIM as well as a physical SIM. And if we scroll down, we could see details about the extraction. Was it successful? Is it encrypted? And further details about what was actually extracted from the device. As we scroll back to the top, we have the option to deactivate that exhibit. We may have a case that involves multiple phones, and we may quickly establish that one of those devices belongs to a family member that has no part in this offense. We can simply quick deactivate, and on our overview, the numbers would reflect that. That device would be removed or hidden. It would still be there. We could still activate it again, but when we're carrying out our analysis, it wouldn't be part of that process. We can also view the extraction log. If you're ever working with our support team, they're going to want to know the details within this log. And you can also save out the extraction log here, or you can run a search. So if you wanted to know if a Python script was run, for example, you can search for it here. And the final tab is persons. Persons is a way of collating all of the different aliases that people build up on a device. For example, if we click, let's go for one here called, because I know this person's on the case, Manbat, we can see that Manbat has several different identifiers. He has a name that he's assigned in the phone. He also has a WhatsApp ID, And all of these identifiers could be used to build up a person profile. And we're going to cover that in part 2 of this series. So if I return to my overview tab, what I want to explore now is the ribbon bar at the top. So the ribbon bar is the top section here. And the very first option is to open a case, close a case. And this next button is an extremely powerful button that's in an analytical tool. And it allows you to add further evidence to your case. So you can import another XRY file. You can import a raw binary dump, call data records, Sailbright files, personal data returns, Burla IVE file, a warrant return, or a grey key extraction. So we're really covering all bases here and allowing you to run your investigation in one tool. The next button, the floppy disk, is save. So as we're working, a case may go over several days. And even in this webinar series, we're going to work on it today. And in part 2, we'll come back and we'll ensure before we sign off, we have hit this save button. The next section is report builder, which we will cover in part 3 of the webinar series. Now, I'm very lucky here in the UK. I deal with 2 time zones. I deal with BST, British Summer Time, and GMT. They're the only 2 times I have to worry about. Now, I'm more than aware that you guys in Australia, Canada, India, US are dealing with multiple time zones. This is where you change the time zone to suit your investigation or what is relevant. Not to suit, we never make up timestamps, but this is where the data is going to make sense. The next option is a filter, exclude artifacts. And I quickly want to go to the options, the cog menu. And I want to go in here and I'll show you why. So the first part of the cog menu is we can change the theme of XAMN. If you're into dark mode and that's your thing, you can switch it up here. If your default system is set to dark mode, you can set it as system default and it will always change to the system default. But I want to draw your attention to is as we scroll down, and you can see when I spoke about at the beginning about setting up your analytical tool, I have an abundance of options available to me here. But the one I want to talk about is a known data. So what this is a known data library. And this comes from NIST. These are hashes of files that are created when the handset software is built. These are going to be files that are not of relevance to you. They have not been user edited and they are hashed of known constant files. So it makes sense to remove them from your case. Now you can do that by going to our customer portal and downloading that .bin file and then saving it to a location and then simply browsing out here and pointing to that bin file. You do it once and then it will work for every case going forward. The other option I spoke about when I spoke about keeping an audit log, an event log, is the ability here. So at the moment, you can see I've enabled full logging, and because it's blue, remember anything in blue in XAMN is a hyperlink. If I click that, it's going to show me my audit log. And again, I can save this out, I can run filters, and I can include this as part of my investigation log. And there's other options available to you here where you can set your Project Vic database, you can set your organization details, and all of these things, once set, will never have to be set again if you're working on the same workstation. So now we've set that, the display option, so the known data library is the file that contains all of those system files. And we've also got a tick box for system files. So these are also files that XRY has identified when decoding as belonging to the setup of that device. So they could be Android system files. We then have application files. So turning on these filters allows me to reduce my overall number. And the next is tags. So as we look at our investigate pane, you can see at the top here, we've got quick views, and we're going to cover quick views very shortly. And you can see the first one is all artifacts. And I know in a room full of forensic examiners, everybody is going to be wanting to be pressed that. But let us revert back to our investigation plan. So our investigation plan gathers a date and time. So should we not start to stick to our investigation plan? Well, we can, but let's click all artifacts first, just to show you the known data library and those files. So when we click all artifacts, it's going to open a new tab here with all artifacts. And you can see within this case, we have 383,000 artifacts. Too many for any person to realistically carry out an efficient investigation. So let's start invoking some of them filters. And you can see here, as we pop up, we click the known data library. And that filter will start to take effect, and you'll see the numbers start to be reduced. And you can see that's brought it down to 225,000. Now that's great, but in my opinion, it's still too many to be investigating. So let's invoke system, which helps take it down further, and then application files. So we're now looking at 94,000 files. That's far better than 388,000. So we referred back to our digital investigation plan, and we knew that we were going to want to be setting some parameters. Now, one of the parameters that most people find that they have to run in an investigation is the ability to run a legal privilege search. So what is a legal privilege? So a defendant has the right to have communication between a legal professional and for that to be private. So as part of an investigation, you may need to run a search to say that you've carried out due diligence to look for legal privilege that you shouldn't be entitled to see. So how can we do that? So on the left-hand pane of XAMN, when you get into all artifacts, is the filters menu. So the filters menu, if I drop here, that is a quick access to my quick views. Remember seeing it at the start, we had these quick views here, but we'll leave it on all artifacts for the time being. I then have data sources. This is a way that I could quickly filter between exhibits. So if I just wanted to see XAMN Pro 4 and it was here, I could click that and all I would be looking at is XAMN Pro 4. The next one is a time and date filter, self-explanatory. We also have a location filter, and we could open a map and then restrict any items that have got geolocation to a certain area. The next one is our index search box. And you'll notice as I start typing in, you can see some of the indexed keywords that have been pre-indexed for you. This has come out of file names. I obviously turned on to search within files. So this allows me to start running keyword searches. Now, obviously that is singular. And if you just hover over the box, a good indicator here within XAMN is you will always get a tip. So you can see here, there's a tip about using an asterisk. So just remember in XAMN, if you hover over anything, you'll likely get a tip if it's a function. As we scroll down, you can see we've got the categories filters. These are on the main case page, but they're also available to you on the left-hand menu. As we scroll down, you can see we've then got the app filters and we've got our tag filters as we work our case. So we spoke about legal privilege and we wanted to make sure that there was a way that we could show that we'd carried out our due diligence by running a legal privilege search. Now, a good way of doing it is by pressing the plus button here, which is going to allow you to add a different filter to what is available on this left-hand menu. And you can see here, I could run a camera filter, I could run a file path or a file name. But what I want to run is a word list, because a word list is going to look for words such as solicitor, barrister, legal, these sort of things that will allow me to show that I at least attempted to narrow out legal privilege. So I press OK, and no word lists have been added. but I can create a new one or I can add a file. We'll create a new one in this case, and we're going to put this in our desktop folder in our webinar, and we're going to call this legal privilege. So we now have the box ready to start inputting the words that we want to search for. So if we look for the word barrister, we look for the word lawyer, we look for the word solicitor, we look for the word legal. So we now have 4 keywords, and I know the list would be more extensive, but we're just going to run this to begin with. And when we press OK, that is now going to run that word list as a filter. And you can see here, word list has now been added to my available filters on the left-hand side. And you can see we've got 46 artifacts. Now, what I could do to get these reviewed is I could simply go up to the top here and I could save a subset. Now, what is a subset? A subset is a viewer file, a portable case, a reviewing tool for a third party. So if I click Save Subset, I want to make sure that my middle box is unfiltered, because I only want to share the files that I want reviewed for legal privilege. If I've got all, I would be sharing the entire case with them. I can have several options for me. I can lock the file for editing so that they can literally just review. I can protect it with a password. I can use a higher level encryption. But the one I want to make sure I've got ticked is to include the XAMN viewer. This is going to allow them to view the content in the free version of XAMN. So that is a good way of dealing with legal privilege. Now, you may want to do this for every single case. You may have a keyword list for a narcotics or a child abuse material case that you want to run to. So as I go through here, how can I do that? I can do that with a quick view. And you can remember on the case, we've got the quick views at the top. These are predefined and built into the tool, but you can create your own, because at the moment we have a filter in play. We can see in the bottom left, it says active filter. We also know we have a filter in play because the funnel is bold. But what I can do is I can now save that as a quick view, so I never have to invoke that word list again. And how do I do that? I come up to quick views here, and you can see I can save it as, and I can simply call it LPP, legal protected privilege, hit add. That is now there, and it indicates that it's a user created file because it's got a person symbol. And when I hit OK, that is now saved as a quick view. And if I come out of here, so I've pressed the button by mistake, I've just lost the word list I've done, fear not, because any case going forward, it's now available to me. This is going to help to save time. And when I click that quick view, you can see the filters now being invoked. And we're returned with the 46 artifacts. So this is just a quick way of automating and making your work more efficient. And it's all about preparing your extraction tool and your analytical tool. Get them set up, spend the time understanding how they work, which will make future investigations far more efficient. Now, of course, that quick view is saved to my current workstation. I may want my department to all work to that standard. So if I go to the quick view menu at the top, you will see if I press the 3 Swedish meatballs, I get the option to export. I can then export custom quick views to my colleagues. And in turn, they would do the same option, but they would simply press import. So that is a good way of ensuring that you all work to the same standard. So if we just clear that filter out now, and we return to our artifact count that occurred after we invoked our known data library filters. Now, the date and time range that we wanted to run, if I click Add Custom Time, you can now see I've got a time. And we know that our defendant was arrested on the 10th. So we're going to leave our filter as the 12th, but I want it to go back a month. So I've clicked from today's date, and I'm going to go back to May the 10th. And obviously it's saying invalid time because we're not at midnight yet. So I'm going to revert it to yesterday, June the 11th, up till May 10th. So we're going to go from May the 10th to June the 11th, and we're going to hit OK. So that is now going to invoke that filter. And we can see here it's May 10 till June 11. That is now given us a third of our artifact count. And this is all because we spent the time working with the investigating officer and setting an investigation plan. You can see we started at 388,000 artifacts. We're now down to 30,000. And there's far more filters that are going to be available to us. But I'm aware that time is against us. So I'll open up to any questions that I've missed in the chat. So let's have a look. So can you export the binary from the Oxygen? If you could export a binary, then yes, that would work, because then you could import it as a binary, or you could import it with XRY as well, of course. And referring to magnet, is that when I spoke about the portable case, and it's a method of sharing it to a party who has no license. And UFDX can of course be imported with XRY, but it's just showing you that if all you've got access to is the XAMN Pro, you can also import it there. You do not need an XRY license if you've got XAMN Pro. And I'm glad someone liked ManBat. That's one of my colleagues with their test device. And we've had a few requests for the mock examples. Yep, please reach out to me on the email address. I will be happy to provide them to you. And this brings us to the end of part 1 of this series. And we haven't really done much investigation in this, but you've got to remember that part 1 of this series was our preparation and planning and setting our strategy. And our plan in place, by putting that plan in place, that in turn, as we showed, helps us immensely in our investigation. We've been able to reduce noise from our case. And when we return, we are now going to be reviewing relevant artifacts to this case. Now, if you do think of any questions that you don't want to ask in a public forum, please feel free to reach out to me on the email address on screen. Or, of course, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So part 2 is going to be heavier. And you asked the perfect question at the right time. We're going to be going heavier into the deeper analysis. We're going to be showing you what data, how you can present it and find it when it's not exported as a nice app filter. We're going to show you how to report on those artifacts that are present. We're going to show you how to report on artifacts that are not present. And we're going to generally do a deeper dive. And I'm just going to put my camera back on because there's been a bit of noise about this. And the noise is about this, which is the MSAB challenge coin. And hopefully you guys can see that without the blur. So that coin is going to be available to be won on this webinar series. And when we return to part 2, we're obviously going to be going through the details of the investigation. We're then gearing up for part 3, which is our final report on artifacts that we have discovered that potentially the tool did not. And so when on part 3, you're going to be set a challenge that you'll find out in part 2, where we're going to set an extraction file, a small subset, where you can go away and use some of the techniques that you've learned from this series to go and find, and then we'll ship out to you the MSAB challenge coin. So part 2, I'm pleased to say that it's going to happen 2 weeks today. So we're going to have part 2 2 weeks today, and part 3 is going to roll on 2 weeks after that. And if you want to join us, you can simply scan the QR code on screen. I will put details out on LinkedIn, and it will come from the MSAB account as well. And I just want to finish by saying I hope that you've enjoyed today's webinar. I know it's been a lot of time and a lot of preparation, but I hope that you can see by doing those steps and by thinking about putting that strategy and that plan in place, it's going to save you a lot of time. But thank you from MSAB, and hope that you're going to join us for part 2. And I just want to thank you again for giving up your time, your precious time, and joining us today. But thank you very much for joining today's webinar.